Hi, I'm Layla Khoo. I'm an artist. I'm currently at the Brontë Parsonage, where 4 years ago we put 12 ceramic vessels out for visitors to respond to the journal entries held by Anne and Emily and provide their hopes and dreams for the next 4 years. Today we're revisiting those pots, smashing them open and see what happened.
The diary papers of Emily and Anne Brontë. Now, Emily and Anne, the two youngest Brontës, don't have as much information as perhaps Charlotte, who's got vast letters in the archive. So they are a bit more hidden. There's a few letters and bits and pieces from them, and their poetry. But the diary papers is really quite unique and reveals quite a bit about these two sisters, and also the daily life here at the parsonage. So the first known diary pages, there might be others in existence, but currently we only know of 6 pages of the sisters' diaries. So the first and second pages of the earliest known ones were dated November 24th, 1834. So they were both just teenagers. And you can kind of sense that from the handwriting and the spelling and the crossings out as well. So a few extracts from this. It gives us some really interesting insights which don't appear obviously in their literary works and letters. We've got Emily starting by saying, I've had rainbow, diamond, snowflake, jasper, some great pet names here. And it gives us that idea of the domestic life. They talk about what they're up to in the real world, but there's also a lovely mention that the Gondels are discovering the interior of Gallaudet. So this is their fantasy world when they were young women. And again, we don't have much of this early Gondel writing, but we obviously know it existed, and the references in the diaries as we go through show that it would have been a vast epic of the imagination. So we've got, again, this is kind of a sign of them being teenagers. She's written, it's past 12 o'clock, Anne and I have not tidied ourselves, done our bedwork, or done our lessons, and we want to go out and play. Don't we all? And then this is the idea of the diary pages that they've started writing, and they've put, Anne and I say, I wonder what we shall be like, and what we shall be, and where we shall be, if all goes on well in the year 1874. So by 1874, they would be in their 50s and 60s, and as we know, they didn't live that long. So there's a real poignancy with these diary pages as well. And she finishes by saying, hoping we shall all be well at that time, we close our paper. Emily and Anne, November the 24th, 1834. The next known page is from 1837. So at this point, Emily's 18 and Anne is 17. And this is one that gives us an amazing sketch of that dining room where the sisters wrote. And highlighted on the table, it says tin box next to where and that's where they hid these diary papers to be opened 4 years later. A few bits from this one. A bit past 4 o'clock, Charlotte working in Aunt's room, Bramwell reading, Anne and I writing in the drawing room. Aunt working in the little room, Papa gone out, Tabby in the kitchen. It's a wonderful capsule of what was going on, who was where, who lived there at the time. Another quote here said, all tight and right, in which condition it is hoped we shall be on this day in 4 years. At which time, Charlotte will be 25 in 2 months, Bramwell just 24, it being his birthday. Myself 22 in 10 months, and Anne 21 and nearly a half. I wonder where we shall be and how we shall be, and what kind of day it will be then. Let us hope for the best. I guess that this day, 4 years, we shall be in this drawing room comfortable. I hope it may be so. Anne guesses we shall be all gone somewhere together comfortable. We hope it may be either. So there's lovely ideas of what they're projecting into the future. Again, still hoping that they'll all be together still. So that's 1837. This next paper was originally in a private collection, has since been reacquired by the Parsonage in 2022. So these 2 pages have come back to us now and back with us. So this was probably after you started the project. So they've come back to the Parsonage, which is where we want everything to come back to. So these were written on the same date, the 30th of July, 1841, aged 21 for Anne and 23 for Emily. And just a little bit from Emily first. And it starts by saying, a paper to be opened when Anne is 25 years old, or my next birthday after, if all being well. We are all stout and hearty, and as I hope is the case with Charlotte, Bramwell and Anne, of whom the first is at St John White, Esquire, Upperwood House, Rawdon, the second is at London on Foot, that's Bramwell, and the third, I believe, is at Scarborough. Their spelling and punctuation is pretty bad. Even in the later years, it doesn't really improve. Ended So she's put editing perhaps a paper corresponding to this. So they'd obviously agreed to write the papers on the same day, but this is the first one where they're apart, so Anne's over in Scarborough. A scheme at present in agitation for setting up a school of our own. As yet, nothing is determined, but I hope and trust it may go on and prosper and answer our highest expectations. This day, 4 years, wonder whether we shall still be dragging on in our present condition or established to our heart's content. Time will show. And then Anne, so writing on the same day, but over in Scarborough, she's obviously been governess of the Robinson family. And she writes, I am governess in the family of Mr. Robinson. I dislike the situation and wish to change it for another. Oh, your heart goes out to her. We are now all separate and not likely to meet again for many a weary week. All these diversities, so before then she's talking about what they're all doing and all their different jobs, all these diversities with many other things we did not expect or foresee in the July of 1837. So 4 years ago, we had no idea that we'd all be so separate. What will the next 4 years bring forth? Providence only knows. And then these last two papers, these are both still in private collections. So hopefully they'll come back here at some point. So these are the last two known ones. There may have been another one, but we don't know. It seems to suggest that this probably is the last one. So again, separate pages written by Emily and Anne, dated 31st of July, 1845. But Emily they actually wrote them the day before on Emily's birthday, but they put the 31st of July, they just got the date wrong. So again, they're fallible like all of us. And this is where, so by now, Emily is 27 and Anne is 25. So 1845, Emily. This morning, Anne and I opened the papers we wrote 4 years since on my 23rd birthday. And that's what we're going to be doing today. This paper we intend, if all be well, to open on my 30th, 3 years hence in 1848. And then there's news. Our school scheme has been abandoned. There's a lot more about that in these letters, but that's just the highlights. And then back to the gondolas. So again, it's wonderful to hear that their imaginary world, even in their late 20s, is still going strong. The gondolas still flourish as bright as ever. We intend sticking firm by the rascals as long as they delight us, which I'm glad to say they do at present. And then we are now all at home and likely to be there some time. So 4 years previous, they were all scattered around. There was just Emily at home. 4 years on, they're all back at the parsonage again. And they've put, with best wishes for the whole house till 1848, July 30th, and as much longer as may be. And on the same date, Anne's written, how many things have happened since it was written? Some pleasant, some far otherwise. If I had known then I had 4 years longer to stay, how wretched I should have been. So that was in her job with the Robinsons. By the time of this, she has left, but she had another 4 years. And 4 years ago, she'd written, I really don't like this job. So you can really feel for her, stuck there for nearly 4 years. So again, this last bit of domesticity here. So we've got Charlotte is now sitting sewing in the dining room. Emily is upstairs ironing. I am in the dining room, in the rocking chair before the fire, with my feet on the fender. Papa is in the parlour. Tabby and Martha, I think, are in the kitchen. Keeper and Flossie, the dogs, are, I do not know where. And as it progresses, Charlotte actually brings the dogs back in, and then she says, oh, the dogs are here now. And again, Tabby and Martha, in the last diary entry, they've gone off, they've left, but they actually both end up coming back again. So it feels like everybody leaves, comes back, leaves, comes back to the parsonage. And again, the gondolas, Anne mentions, we have not yet finished our gondola chronicles that we began 3.5 years ago. When will they be done? That's every writer's nightmare, isn't it? When will I finish this? And she's put at the end, I wonder how we shall be and where and how situated on the 30th of July, 1848. So 1848, this is where it brings it home that we have those dreams and ambitions for 4 years. That Emily Brontë died that year in 1848. So we don't know if they opened the papers in July and if they wrote any more. We haven't got them, and I don't think they're mentioned in any letters, so we can guess that there might be some. And then just the year after that, Anne died in 1849 as well, so still tragically young. If you want to find out more about these, I've just put this together as some highlights. And the book that we have is the Diary Papers of Emily and Anne Brontë. I think that's in the shop as well. And that gives you a full transcript of each one. And it's a lovely different sort of way into the Brontes, even if you've not read much before, and it gives you really interesting insights into their lives over about an 11-year period. So that's it from me, to give you a highlight of the Brontes. And I'm going to hand over to Layla.
Hi everybody, I'm Layla and I'm the artist responsible for Contemplating Hope. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about how I work as an artist, so you can sort of understand where I come from when I sort of create a piece of work like this. So working with a collection, I try to find something that I can relate to and give others that moment of connection. Not just because it's a historic artefact, which is interesting in its own right, but I generally look for something that I think that we can relate to sort of the way we live today and sort of allow ourselves to put ourselves in that position of people who originally used them. I think that the act of participation takes the work from my initial idea into something which visitors can shape through their own interaction. So it's a collaborative project as it goes on. So I start something off, everybody else gets to finish it. So it's never really complete until visitors start to come and take part in the work. And I hope that in creating a moment to pause and think about how you want to interact, it allows you to connect more deeply with the collections, the sites and the stories. So this project started way back in 2019 when I had the absolute joy of my first visit to Parsonage. It's the first sort of numinous experience of stepping into this really special place where incredible women wrote some of the greatest novels of all time. However, there's a small omission I need to make with that, in that I'm not a Brontë scholar, and actually historically wasn't the biggest fan of the novels. The last time I'd read them prior to working with this was when I was at school. I found them a little bit bleak. And that's kind of where I left them. But as working, after coming to visit the Parsonage and to decide whether or not we were going to go on with work, I took the opportunity to revisit the vast greatest hits of the novels. And I found something different in them through this reading, through being here, through speaking to the curators, through experiencing the collection, through really understanding the context in which the Brontes lived. I didn't see them as bleak anymore. I saw them as, even in sort of fairly dire circumstances, as women who were trying to find elements of hope. And their heroines were trying to find hope even through really difficult times. And that really stuck with me. And so, moving on from that, I was then shown some of the more personal aspects of the papers. And Anne very kindly showed me the diary papers we have in the collection. And that was, I think that was really the moment where I really sort of connected to the collection. There was these two young women living through difficult times of their own, but writing themselves these small missives of hope, never intended to be seen by anybody else. And as I already said, they sort of seem to generally have three sort of core elements, these diary papers. That it was what was happening in the wider world, what was happening in their home environment, what was happening in their imaginary worlds, but what they hoped for. Even when their hopes were really quite, sort of, would seem quite basic now, that we'd hope we're just all alive in 4 years' time, which, to be fair, living in Howard at that point, it was a reasonable hope to have. And I think when I discovered the new book for the published works, it was the diary papers that really inspired me, that give a really rare glimpse into their personal lives, their hopes and ambitions, and the themes that they wanted to reflect on. So within weeks of sort of seeing these papers and going away and sort of spending some time in the collection, I really knew what I wanted the work to be. I wanted to make something that would allow visitors to share a moment of contemplation with the Brontes, to be able to come to this place, sit where they sat, and to reflect on their own lives and the world that we're living in now. So I was looking forward to regular visits to the Parsonage. That's generally how I work, is that the idea starts and I can spend more time with the collection, get really embedded with it, and I really get to sort of live and breathe it while I'm making the work, to sort of finesse the ideas. I was looking forward to exploring the collection more deeply as the work progressed. And it was March 2020, and the world began to evolve. Suddenly hope felt lost, and yet also the only thing that we all had to hold on to. Priorities and lives changed, but as an artist who works alone in the studio, my work continued. I started to keep a journal, partly to document the bizarre and at times soul-destroying experience of living through the pandemic, and partly to see what patterns emerged during this time. What was noteworthy each day? How much of the journal was past reflection, present recording, or future speculation? And with the help of Anne and her invaluable video tours of the now deserted house and collection, I was the only person who was allowed inside the house at any time, so I just get some of these videos of them walking around showing me things. Contemplating Hope started to take shape. I felt a connection spanning the years, working in rural isolation, surrounded by an ever-present threat of an illness spreading throughout the world, and trying to find a moment of hope for an unknown future. So the inspiration sort of comes from sort of that overall concept of what I wanted the work to be. Then I needed to consider, because I'm a physical artist, as to what the aesthetics of that would be and how this would look. And even while the work was being made, we had no idea, if at all, if museums would actually be able to open again. So the act of making this work was a huge leap of faith for everybody concerned. Throughout 2020, I set about creating Contemplating Hope. I knew that I wanted visitors to have the opportunity to create their own diary papers. I wanted to create a method for these to stay private in their contents whilst being on display while stored. Anne and Emily stored their diary papers over a 4-year period, and they kept it in the bottom of a tin box. I was able to go through the contents of this tin prior to the parsonage closing down, which still contained the original haberdashery items that Anne and Emily kept alongside it. Buttons, threads, pieces of lace, hook and eye patches, just sort of everyday sewing pieces. I didn't want to make another tin for the new diary entries, just sort of exactly copy how they kept their diary pieces. And I knew whatever the entries were stored in, I wanted there to be no way for there to be opened for anybody to take a sneak peek at them before we were ready. And so we wanted this sort of revisiting to be a surprise for everybody when it came, an event of its own, which is here. And so I created 12 ceramic vessels, one of which is in front of you now. One for each month of the year. Each vessel has been decorated with a motif, one of the original haberdashery items that Brontë stored in their tin. So this was like a small sort of cabochon that was designed to be added on to something. And they've been made in the style of a large piggy bank. So in that once each entry has been posted through the slot, there's no way to access them again until we break it. The shapes and colours used were designed so that they would be able to sit gently in the parsonage. I didn't want to copy any particular item in the passage, but I wanted something, knowing that they were going to be around for quite some time, I wanted something that would be able to sort of sit quietly with the collection that was here. So the blue and the white reflects the blue and white ceramics that I shown in the kitchen, and it was a shape that seems sort of quite classical, so it wouldn't be sort of jarring to look at in amongst, and people want to be able to sort of take that step back in time without seeing something that's too modern to break that sort of spell. So the first vessel to be made was a test piece, which is a rough model of how I hoped each piece would be, with some ideas of design on it. This is sort of a process that I have to go through every project with sort of larger pieces that I make. The initial piece is sacrificial. It's the piece that lets me know everything that's wrong with my design and methodology, of which there will always be many things wrong with those. Ceramics is a dark art in that respect. From every part of this piece that breaks, warps, cracks, or in any other way fails to turn out as I'd imagined, there's something to learn before I can set a system in place for building multiples. Once these mistakes have been rectified, I can start making progress. So for these pieces, an initial model was carved, which you can see sort of forming the clay at the top here. It was carved from hard foam, and each vessel was individually press moulded over that model and rolled out slabs of clay, which you can have to create pattern pieces over this piece. Once it's dry enough to hold its shape, each one is removed and it has a lid. It has a lid placed on it, which is also made from the mould, and is securely attached. Each piece then has a plaque attached with the month of the year inscribed, and was then painted with white slip whilst the pot's still damp. Each pot then has to dry for weeks before it's safe to fire. The whole piece is then fired, has the first firing in the kiln, is then taken out, decorated with blue, glazed, and then put in for a second firing. So there's lots of opportunities there for everything to go wrong. What's called a velvet foot, which you'll see on the bottom of this one, is attached to each piece to protect any furniture that the parsonage that the vessels were going to be placed on, because we weren't quite sure where they were going to be in the parsonage. We wanted the opportunity to be able to place one or two in the rooms as if they're being lived with, and obviously all of the furniture in the passage is quite precious, so we have to make sure that was protected. The final part of the process was to consider from the outset how we want these pieces to be broken. It needed to be like an intentional act. It was really important that it wasn't some kind of unhappy accident that somebody fell over and broke one of these pieces, that we were really intending to go revisit them. And I wanted there to be a feeling of some sort of special ritual about the breaking of the pots. So we created a key to break them with, which is this. It's really heavy. This is our key. It's a wedge shaped specifically to fit the opening. It's made from solid bronze. Feel free to have a feel at the end, it weighs a ton. To be displayed alongside vessels throughout the year. As we cautiously emerged back into the world in 2021, the work was finally installed in the parsonage for visitors to participate with. This now felt like an incredible moment in time to be able to capture and hold on to. The first visitors to take part were only admitted in tiny numbers to the parsonage. And I was incredibly grateful to all of the staff who were committed to make this possible during an incredibly difficult time to be participating with groups of people. I was amongst the first to complete my own diary paper, and just like the original diary entries, these were to be stored away unseen for 4 years. As the year went on, the world and the Parsonage continued to change and adapt to new circumstances. Visitor numbers were able to increase, as were the number of people able to take part in the work. So this is one of the blank diary papers. So on each one we asked what's taking place in your life at this moment in time, what news in the wider world are in your thoughts today, and what do you hope for the next 4 years. So people could take that as they wanted and put as much detail or as little as they wanted to. But these were all quite small pieces, so it don't require people to remain relatively succinct. And now, 4 years later, the time's come to revisit our lives and hope from this unique moment in time. As with any passages in time, in some ways I can hardly believe how quickly this has come round. But then having to create the work in isolation also feels like an absolute lifetime ago. Once smashed open, a selection of these will be displayed each month alongside the original Brontë diary entries. And this main vessel is actually a unique one. It represents both the beginning and the end of the project. Because so few visitors were able to visit the parsonage during the initial month of May, this was then actually brought back out again for the final month of May. So it's a bookend piece, really. It's got the island of the year. I'm beyond excited to have the privilege of smashing the first pot, and far from being sad to destroy one of my own creations, I'm delighted that they serve their purpose of keeping all of our hopes safe for the last 4 years, and now it's time for them to reveal their secrets. Because the creation isn't the ceramic vessel, it's the many thoughts, moments and hopes that visitors have documented, inspired by the same act of hope by Anne and Emily Brontë. I can't wait to see what unfolds over the next year, and I hope we have the opportunity to let participants reconnect with their journal entries. With my life, with the man I found later in life. In the wide world that the pandemic of COVID virus passes, but leaves us with a brighter kind of future. And they hope to stay with the man that they love for many more adventures together and have many good family get-togethers again.